I'm very glad that all of you can be here in spite of the design, which is heavily demanding your time right now. So this is great, unless, of course, you don't take design courses. Today's the last lecture in the smart cities, and that is the transition from smart cities to responsive cities. And along these lines, we'll look at what has happened in the lecture so far and a look into the future. Let's think about cities again. That was the topic of the whole semester now. And cities are great. Cities are the most complex and sophisticated artifacts that humans have done so far. And when we look at cities in different ways, we can think, how did the city interact with you the last time? And I ask you this question again and again because it will change over time. So how did the city communicate with you? And if you had this experience that some people have, by the way, who's driving a car? Nobody's driving a car. One is driving a car. He's writing, so we have to see if he had this experience. Okay, good. Okay, so you drive into a city and it's a nice day and suddenly a flash. What happens? You had that experience? Okay, so this is an experience you have when you enter into a city, and normally it's not a nice one. You get caught by a speed trap, and then you don't know what happens next. You know, what will happen? Because it's urban police, it's a Kantonspolizei or whatever. Will they immediately catch you, or will they write you a letter, or what will happen? So this is an interaction with your city, but it's not a very interactive one and not a very friendly one normally. Or this one here, sometimes you really have things that bother you in the city, like your neighbors. If you look at this beautiful piece of architecture, and obviously there is some problem with the heat in this building inside, maybe, and probably makes a lot of noise and emissions. How do you deal with that? You can maybe go, in this case, to your neighbor and talk to him, or you have to go through the city. Or you have this case, and you know it's bothering you because you would like to look out your window, you cannot, and at the same time it's very hard to figure out who did that or who's responsible for that. But these are cases where we really bother about things and we want to improve them and don't quite know how. Definitely the speed trap is one example, a very early example of a smart city, because a smart city consists of smart devices that do something to protect you from the others or others from you or everybody from being run over by too fast cars. But we see that smart cities, everything we looked at in this semester was concentrated on mainly on smart mobility, on smart buildings, on smart infrastructure. But where were the people? Was it people-centered? Was it really interactive? And this is the point where we have to think ahead. What will come next, or what will come after the smart cities? These pictures, you remember, example from Songdo, where you have a few people, you don't even see them at the bottom, looking at screens. The screens are looking at streets. The streets may have some people in it or not. You find some individuals that are being filmed at the time, but it's not an interaction. It's really a one-directional observation in smart cities. So we could define smart city, when we want to be very, very simple, as the sum of big data that you gain from all these sensors and appliances in the city and information and communication technology, or ICT. We have, of course, in the past many examples that people wanted to make their citizens happy. So governments, city governments want to make their citizens happy. And this is the same thing that smart city governors and smart city mayors promise, that they want to make their people more happy. In this time, 1749, and even before, when it was about the public happiness, there were no smart devices in the city, but you still had to find ways to make people really happy and satisfied. Let's look at some of the examples of smart buildings, smart homes, and smart cars. this one is, do you know what it is? Yeah, right. It's just on the other side of the street. And you could imagine some buildings have that, the so-called smart window shades. You know them? Have you ever experienced them when they go up and down? There's, yes, okay. So is that smart? I mean, everybody who thinks of that thinks of the points when it didn't work, right? Most of the time. So these are not smart, but they are very effective. And once they would really become smart, then they could also be used in buildings all over. And that brought this Kent Larson from the MIT Media Lab in 2012 to say, I don't believe in smart homes. That's kind of a bogus concept. I don't want to be that rough because many people, much progress has been done since then. And I want to give you just a few examples. I think today the smart cars are smarter than the homes already. And that really made me think, why are they smarter? Why can they do more and more safely than what I can do with things in the home? So I took these snapshots just a few minutes ago, and at least in the smart card, you can see today where is the card located, where is it sitting, and all kinds of information, how much battery is left in it, for example. So that's one example. Or another little smart car, you can see what is again, how much battery it has, how far it could get you. But you could also see where it is sitting in the landscape, and you could see roughly how far you could drive with that battery load around. So that's very important information. You wish you would have that in your home or in your city or in your building. In your city or in your home, in your smart home, you can see a few pieces of information if you're lucky. Today, I took this morning, and you can say what the temperature was supposed to be there and the temperature outside, and then you can put all kinds of schedules from the outside through the internet, but that's about as far as you can get today. So we think we have to get further, and we have to put people in the center of the whole development. Now, people, normally they're excluded from all you saw before because you don't even need them. If you have autonomous car, you don't even need people to drive them anymore. And then all this information is not necessary anymore. But we have to place people back into the driver's seat, literally and, of course, also indirectly. So that's how we define responsive cities. It's people and their perception capacities plus the smart city technology, because it would be crazy to throw it all away. Now that we have it, we might as well use it, but we have to use it in a better way than before. And there are already examples where this is working quite well. Many of you probably have been to Barcelona, but you see how they did it. They closed some of the streets. They also provided places where you can still park and load and unload your car, but they have really changed the flow of traffic in the city in a quite smart way. People enjoy it, and they can use the city in a way. They can just sit there, and this is something which was unthinkable a few years ago. You have to do learning at the beginning of all this responsive city interaction. You have to do learning and studying best practice, where it's built, how it works, and so on. And this is one of the most important things. You have to have the possibility to give input to your city. Because let's face it, we demand a lot from our cities, but what do we do for our cities? I think I asked you this question before. How did you communicate with your city before? Just think of it. Who did you address? Who did you talk to? What did you demand? What did you suggest? And were you able to suggest it to a person or to a committee, or how did it work? So this is a very, very important activity for responsive city. Actually, that's the key point. And you can only give this input if you either have a person confronting you, or you have some kind of a platform, computational platform, an app, or any application that you can really give your input into the city, how you want it to be. Some of these images that you remember from the course. Maybe you see them in a different way now. I want you to reflect on them. You have to decide how do you want to live. Is how difficult it is to change something once you have a situation like this. Do you want to live in high density? At least you can make this this choice maybe, or you want to live like this in low density. So let's just take a vote. Who is for high density living? Wow, that's half. And who is more than half? And who's for low density living? That's a third, maybe, yes. So, but do you want to live in this kind of low density living? Probably not, and then it starts. So you have to be able to give some feedback to your city planners, how you want to live. Because after all, you are the persons living in the city, so you should decide that, be able to decide that. So that's, of course, Los Angeles. Or, like these people did it, we talked about it before, in Zermatt. It was 1946 when they decided to rebuild their transportation system, and rather than having those horse-drawn carriages only and cars that made lots of noise and stink in the city, they decided to add this part, which is the battery, and have all this battery-driven transportation. So this is working quite well now. So although we know what we want quite often and we know what we should do, we are so full of contradictions. This is really amazing, each one of us. So just a few examples which are important in this context, because if you want to improve your city, you have to expect that your city comes back to you and says, well, it's nice that you want this, but look at you, what do you do? So if you say, let's ban all the cars from the city, and then the city comes back to you and says, that's nice, but where did you go for your last holidays? And you say, well, I just flew to the Maldives. For how long? Oh, well, 5 days or 6 days. And I said, yeah, well, that's okay, but you just set free as much CO2 as you could have driven for 20,000 kilometers with your SUV through the city. So what are you talking about? So these contradiction, this is one of the contradictions. Same here. So we claim, we are so sustainable in these cities. They're so livable, beautiful. And then, as we talked before, India, how many tons of CO2 per person set free every year? Remember? No, but it's 1.64. So it's much, much less than here. So how can we teach people who use or produce less CO2 how to produce less CO2 if we produce much more CO2? So these are the contradictions we have to come to grips with. Or this one here, education is still quite exclusive. So you are members of a very exclusive club, which is good for you, but maybe many other people cannot access this information that you have. And we see the strange development also that education tries to be more democratic. So I'm standing right in the middle of you. But in the old days, just 100 years ago, lecture halls were built like this. This is actually from our ETH, from the main building, the aula. So the professor would stand up here and talk and preach. And the people would sit like this, listening. But today, everything has shifted. So where the professor was, there's now the big screen. And the person who's actually speaking, she's down here somewhere. So that is already a big switch. But still, education is quite exclusive. If you make a whole semester, next semester that we plan to do on responsive cities, we have to have a good reason. And the biggest reason is, as you know by now, that the gigantic amount of people moving into cities, new ones, existing ones, in the next 20, 30 years. And that is really the main reason, because these cities cannot be built as we do them today, because then you will have the 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 tons of CO2 being emitted by a person per year, and that just cannot work for this another 2, 3 billion people moving into the cities. Because the cities emit 80% of the greenhouse gases, mainly through industry, as you saw from the charts that we gave you in the class, but also through transportation. So that's the other big emitter of greenhouse gases. From this image, as strange as it sounds and strange as it looks, you can also depict a little bit that houses, residences in these hot climates are relatively little CO2 emitters with 5, 6%. Yes?
I just have a question about your personal opinion. Do you think that it actually will change, or will they just like continue to build the city as we build it today?
No, I think it will change. That's why you are here. That's why I'm here. I'm totally convinced that it will change if you want to change it. I'm just trying to show you how it could be changed. And then you have to decide if you want to change it or not. But I'm totally convinced it can be changed, yes. Absolutely, because even in Los Angeles, where this is, you just put really you cover all the roofs with photovoltaics, and you change all these cars to electric cars, and then you have eliminated already a lot of the problems. You have created other problems. People don't have the money to do that, maybe, and all kinds of secondary problems. But the main problems, even of sprawled cities, you in hot climates or in warm climates with lots of sun, you can solve today. So I'm convinced it will happen if people find that attractive. Not so much driven by governments, maybe, but by the people. And that's the great thing about responsive cities, because in responsive cities, you are the one who makes the decision or who proposes the thing. And then if you have an industry or technology that has the means to do that at a reasonable price, then it will happen. I'm really convinced. Then there were other cities. If you remember in the 18th century, in the 19th century, when the cities were really polluted in Europe, especially London, Paris, and these other cities, it was so bad that architects and planners decided we have to separate the working and the living quarters. And the whole Siam movement was part of this. And that was the separation of the working and the living, which had all kinds of side effects, among other these side effects, taking it apart, and the production was somewhere else, and the people lived here, and then they had to be transported to their production sites. So a solution also was when there was lots of crime and bad conditions in the cities, they say, okay, let's build another new city. And this is, of course, Brasilia, city built from scratch, just like Chandigarh, in the jungle in both cases, or in a remote place, relatively remote place from the main centers. But it took years and years and years for these cities to become full of life and really working. So that might not be the solution either. And we do know, there's also a contradiction, that we can have top quality of life with low environmental impact, and that we can have a combination of high-tech and low-tech, new forms of living, old forms of living, quite closely. It's your choice if you want to live there or not, but the quality of life can be quite high in these places. What we know from science, you remember the talk on complexity science by Marco Schlepfer, is that cities are complex systems and complex networks. And this is an old slide we did more than 10 years ago. We did the Science City. The Science City, somewhere there it is, Science City, ETH Zürich-Hönckeberg, Hochschulcampus und Stadtquartier für Denkkultur, it says. And this was our contribution to this complex system of Zurich. And people thought it was great. They added it to all the other projects in Zurich, to the museums and so on. They printed it, they gave it to everybody who was flying from the airport. So this suddenly became part of the city of Zurich, this Science City here, which hadn't existed before as a name or as an entity, just as a collection of few buildings. So what we really need is innovation in city planning and city management. And that image, maybe you recognize some of these people. They were actually here. Some of them were here. Some of them studied here. Some of them are here, like Vahid, but he has this thing in his face. You cannot recognize it. This was the starting point or the starting months of the Future Cities Laboratory in Singapore. You can see it had this garage like feeling. We were in a basement with fences around, and it was very, very tight and not much space. But this was the start of this new Future Cities Lab to make something really different for city planning. And then it went on. So there are a few steps we think are necessary to move from smart cities to responsive cities. So we take the smart cities, we take the smart city technology and the infrastructure, and then use that as building blocks for the responsive cities, which includes citizens and their responsibility, because responsiveness and responsibility are very closely related. Because a city is not a hotel. Even in a hotel, you might have some responsibility. But in the city, when we just live there and just take everything as granted, nothing will happen. It will get worse than before. So we have to be aware. It takes citizens and their individual responsibility. The old examples of the world show that it is possible without high tech, like the Siena example that we saw before. Citizens and citizen spirit, citizens knowing what good governance and bad governance is, built this city. And today, once you do that, try to do that with technology, like in Songdo, it will take a while until the citizens and the technology possibly can work together. We hope that it will work, but to do it just like top-down will be very difficult, because if you build the city first and there are no people, it's hard to engage them when they come from all parts of the country. And in Singapore, where you already have people and high technology, it is relatively easy to combine the two into a responsive city. The same, by the way, like Zurich or most of the cities that you come from. Then, to build these responsive cities, we need tools. And these tools you already know. One of the tools you have heard about in class, and one of the tools you have hopefully used by yourself. And I just want to focus on these two, the citizen design science and the other tool, the massive open online courses, which we call the responsive education. The citizen design science, you remember this image, the Ponte Vecchio, which is a combination of three things, of citizen design, plus citizen science, plus design science. And just try to recall the images that you have when we talked about these things. You see also some new images. So citizen design is really when out of necessity or fun or just because you want to, you build your own design. And this was the case in Rio de Janeiro, of course, in South America. There was the driving force was necessity, because there was no one who built that for them. They couldn't just rent a place there. They had to build it. They came there, had to design it and build it. And citizen design is also very old. In Europe, it has been the same thing. Citizens, and with the help of some specialists, they designed these old buildings and they actually built them. And these old buildings are very resilient and sustainable. So this is all just adobe and plaster, and this is oak beams, and the roof is made out of slate. But this lasts for centuries if you do it right by citizens. No modern buildings would last that long. You also see what happens if you have to design things out of necessity again. The camps, which are refugee camps either from immediate war situations or from longer-term tensions, they pop up or popped up in many places of the world. Here, this example from Africa and from this wonderful exhibition by Manuel Herz, who made these photos, and with these photos was very successful recently, but it shows how the different parts of a city can be designed based on necessity by the people. And you see the pathways, they're not grids, just grids, but they really develop as they develop naturally. Same thing here from South Sudan. People have some rough estimate where the blocks should be. It's like in your exercise with the Qua kit. And then they start to build their own houses in there. Or this example here that you saw, this is really, really amazing because how on earth would you build on this hill such a monastery and a village? There was no planning office who said, here you should build this and that. This was a common action of the people. It was truly citizen design. And not alone that, but urban farming, all these things we talk about today were guaranteed here by having this farmland around it to supply people there with water and food. And this one that you also saw, here's a view from the top. This is when you have too much water or when you have only water, you take advantage of the water and you build your houses into the water. Here, this is all the lake, this inlet lake I mentioned before. And then you have the individual houses. They're like streets of water, and you can navigate around them. But at the same time, and this is the interesting feature, it's hard to see from up there, but you have this one here. Somebody knows what that is? Have you been there? No? Nobody has been there? I think you will be there eventually, unless they destroy it so quickly, because it's already underway. But this is land, this is water, and these here are the floating gardens in the water. So these are pieces of not land, but roots and grass and so on, and they're put there, they're floating on the water, and on top of this they plant the plants, and then of course you never have to water the plants because they can go straight down into the lake. And these pieces here, for example, and there's another one over there, they supply the food for all these people. So it's quite amazing. And from down there, you also have the traditional fields, of course, here in this area, and some newer farms down there. But together they supply this community. So that's the same thing, just from the top. So, but this is citizen design. No, there was no planning office who did that 500 years ago, 300 years ago. It's in Myanmar, in Burma, as it was called before, and it's rather central in the country. It's really fantastic. So that was just a few examples for citizen design. Now, citizen science is a bit more difficult. Citizen science, we have the scientists here, and you are sitting in your home, and you study something on the PC, and you use your mental capacities. If you remember this slide from Kevin Chavinsky, who's working just right now, who says we have this amount of capacity here, this big gray block here. We have this much capacity to use our brain for, and we're just using this tiny little piece at the top to do whatever, something useful. And design, of course, is the most useful thing to do. And he has devised this Zooniverse, and there you can see those examples where you can use citizen science today. And this is really great. So mapping change, the Milky Way project, the radio meteor zoo, the camera catalog, supernova hunters, and all of those are citizen science projects that are ongoing now. You can just get online and subscribe to them, and under the guidance of a scientist, you do a new science. Because without you, they couldn't do this research. But you also couldn't do this research without them. So that's a very good way of a responsiveness between individuals and the designers community. But people also do that themselves. If they don't know if they want to have access to the internet, for example, they just build their own devices, and this is the example from India. And if they want warm water and electricity, nobody gives it to them. They build their own contraptions, and it works. They have some knowledge of science, they have some knowledge of engineering, of architecture, put it together, build it, and it's great. And the third part, this is also something that education, architectural education, was focused on most, and that is the design science. Fortunately, all of you, if you study architecture, you still have to do practical things. You have to go and take a practicum and work with your hands to understand what you are working and planning for. And design science is on the intellectual side, of course, and this is where you have the books, where you have the collection of data. You put the data together into information, you condense the information into knowledge, you put the knowledge in the old days into books, today you put them into programs, and with these books then you can store the rules for design that we all need, and in the past you could do these beautiful things with it. These are all done according to certain design rules, especially these buildings here, which you can then multiply and put in books and give to people, and they can build this in all kinds of variations. So this is a visible example of design science. Let's come to the second big tool, and this is education. Because how do we get all this knowledge to the people out there, not just to you, but to your colleagues throughout the world? And there are three things that are important for responsive education: to be inclusive, to share the knowledge, and to learn from feedback. To be inclusive means, don't restrict it to you sitting in this place. And that means everybody, in this case, who has a PC or some kind of tablet can use this education. Share this knowledge means really give it away. Don't keep it. Try to keep it. And learn from feedback. And this is the most crucial thing, as you will see. Because people know so much about construction, about things. They are not unable to do design. If they need to transport concrete from this level to this level here on the first floor, and they don't have electricity and they don't have any motorized things, they build ramps just out of normal wood, and they use their donkeys to put the concrete into the pockets, and the donkeys walk up there and they put the concrete up there. In India, in Chandigarh, the whole huge building, the first thing they built was this donkey ramp to bring up the concrete. And it makes so much sense. Think of it. It's totally sustainable. No noise except for the occasional donkey cries maybe emitted, no bad pollution, CO2, maybe methane, but it's so much more sustainable than what we do today. If we do something like this today, to lift a little rock from here to there, what do? We do this. It's amazing. We bring in a huge truck, and this huge truck, he puts up a little bagger, even bigger, and this bagger is just putting then little stones up here, so the man can just take it from here to there. That's it. And this is really this explains a lot why we have this CO2 consumption. Let's think about it. It's necessary. So people in these countries like Ethiopia that I was talking about before, they can do very simple planning tools, have very simple planning tools, but with that they have to have the whole building site constructed. Like this one plan and this little spreadsheet here on the PC, that's all they have. But then, as our colleague here next door, Dear Cable and Philip Block have done here in Ethiopia as well, using local material, local building methods to build these beautiful buildings. And then, this is the feedback. This is so important. This is a student from Ethiopia who was working on this project, and then this project was very successful. So we invited this student to come back to us, to a conference, to tell us what they had learned. So that was incredible. She was an undergraduate student, like Parth. And so she came from Ethiopia to Zurich and gave the lecture of what they learned and what we learned. It was really, really fantastic. So this is responsive education. Massive open online courses is the technology basis we use for that now, because we think it is a democratization of education. It's very important. And the MOOC series we have so far are Future Cities, Livable Cities, Smart Cities. That's the one that you are or were in. And the one coming next year is Responsive Cities. That's what we're working on. A little feedback on what we saw in this course, 166 countries participating. You can see where your colleagues are. You see that yourself. But the history of this MOOC is important. In the first MOOC, and I mentioned that at the very beginning, maybe now you understand better, we just had the broadcasting mode. We said something, our MOOC team here assembled something, we put it on the platform, send it out. And then more and more people gave us feedback. Like this woman from Ethiopia coming to us, not physically, but they sent us feedback. And then they sent us these images, how a city, a new city is emerging, rather than just answering questions. And then we started the integration. And this is where you come in, where you are. So you are now here at ETH. You are in this MOOC, and you are sending out your design ideas. You put them on the platform. Everybody could see it. But now you also see your designs being commented on by other people. And suddenly we have an incredible new thing happening. That has rarely happened before. Normally you have research driving teaching, but in this case, the same tool that you are using for design and for education is starting to drive research. So it's an inversion, and that is fantastic. This is your well-known surface to the QuarkKit interface, and that will be improved because of your feedback. Remember the last exercise you did? You said what you would want to have. Some of these things, they will flow into the next version of this. So it's teaching-driven research, what you're doing now. And something even more amazing is suddenly citizens can have a platform. Doing this with the MOOC, that all the people in the MOOC can make their proposals for this one site in South Africa, brought us to the idea, why don't we use that even for bigger projects somewhere else? And also what can come out of this is that we now have all these different solutions or proposals for a solution in this space. We can start to overlay them and see if certain heat maps or certain hotspots develop, something you could never do before. So this is the citizen design platform. I guarantee you, every city that you live in, will live in the end, will have to have such a thing, a citizen design platform. Why can you do that only with your car? Why can you do that only with your home? You have to have this for your city. And then the next thing is to get into the city management, because here, again, with this simple tool, and you did it actually, this is incredible, you start to vote on design. That also is very difficult to imagine for people who have never done that. You vote on design because you looked at the design of others, of your colleagues and the people out there, and you started to vote on it and to comment on it. This is extremely important. This is responsiveness, because suddenly you start to interact with the others in a very constructive way. And there you can see what they wrote and why they did this and so on. So it's very, very rich environment came into existence just this semester. I thought, how can that work? Does it work? And I think I told you also once before, when we initiated this campus here, the Science City campus, we took a similar approach, but we didn't have any of these tools. We just had pieces of paper, and we asked people in the survey, where would you want to do what? But the point is exactly where then the things are being built, or have been built now, like the student housing and these other facilities, like the sports facilities and the science lab, the animal science lab. That's exactly what they proposed. They didn't have these tools yet, but they proposed it, and if you listen to it, you can build without objection. And we will use this tool that you just saw before for the new site in Singapore. our Singaporean students, did they survive here? I don't see. Ah, there you are. Yes, yes, yes. So you know this one, huh? Tanjung Pagar. And this whole area will, all the containers and everything that's underneath will move away. So this is the place where 70,000 apartments will be built and also 500,000 square meters of office space. And now we are adapting that program that we developed for you in this course to be used for the citizens of Singapore living around there or maybe even further away on Sentosa or somewhere to make proposals how they would like to have this. So you have to be our ambassador and explain that program over there because you're probably the first one who knows it from Singapore. And we have workshops in Singapore in our Future Cities Lab, first with a very small group of people, introducing him to them, and then spreading it out to support the city and the citizens in making proposals for this site. So remember this, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, that will be completely different. Hopefully it will be a responsive city. Okay, so a few take-home messages. Future cities must be livable and responsive. I think we saw that. In Zurich, we have looked ahead for 100 years and see how it could look like in 100 years if city really stays a responsive city. The structure can still be there, but the city energy production and everything, the emission situation has to totally change, and that's how it could be in 100 years. And remember, responsibility really is the foundation of responsive cities. So this is the ground. It doesn't come for free. And that means from learning. You have given a good example because you've stayed here the whole course. You have done these things. So we have shown responsive learning. And remember, the citizen design science is something serious that is component of these three components: citizen design, design science, and citizen science. And you can see how it has been used in other forms over the centuries. And we have to move from complaining to designing. Now, you're not in the complaining generation. You're not the Wutbürger, as they're called in Germany. The Wutbürgers get enraged about everything. It's terrible. But they have no channel to bring it to the right places. You have all the technology. You can bring your Wut or turn your Wut into designing. And then you can do responsive parks, propose things, find the right sponsoring, just do it. You have to learn to negotiate. This is very, very important. Find the people, take negotiating tasks to do that correctly. The advice to the governments is to listen to their citizens, as they did here. This is here on this campus. The advice to the university is do research, but very clean research. Don't model with all kinds of other intentions. Just research results. We need clean and clear results that you and anyone else can use them. And to the citizens, be responsive. And that was you, or that is you. That here, for example, is just from the last exercise where we asked for this toolkit, for the comparison, the voting. And you can see all over the world where people actually did this. So this is responsiveness in the modern age. And then, of course, the major goal in the end is to make our cities, our future cities, the best and most responsive places humanity has ever built, lived, and worked in. And this is now your job. Doesn't matter where you go, Jakarta, or Naples, or Ho Chi Minh City, or stay in Zurich. So, thank you very much.